Life, as you understand it, is movement, warmth, decay, and change. It is the slow march of days into nights, the certainty that nothing remains the same for long. But a Necron Tomb World does not change. It waits. It has waited through the rise and extinction of empires whose names have been erased from the stars. It waited while oceans boiled away, while continents cracked and reformed, while the galaxy screamed itself apart in wars so vast that even memory could not contain them. And now, impossibly, it waits for you. A tomb world is not abandoned. That is the first lie every intruder believes. From orbit it appears inert, a lifeless sphere of stone and metal, scarred perhaps by ancient impacts or smothered beneath dust and ash. There are no cities glittering in the sunlight, no fleets guarding its approaches, no signals crying out into the void. To the Imperium, to rogue traders, to scavengers and scholars alike, it looks like a relic, another dead world in a galaxy overflowing with them. But death, on a Necron Tomb World, is not an ending. It is a state of readiness. The silence is deliberate. Deep beneath the planet's crust, buried under layers of living metal and forgotten bedrock, systems hum with perfect, tireless precision. They do not sleep. They do not dream. They do not decay. They observe. Every atom of the world is mapped, measured, and remembered. Every vibration, every shift in mass, every trace of foreign matter is registered by intelligences older than most stars. The planet knows when you arrive. It knows how many heartbeats you carry within you. It knows how long you are likely to last. To ask what life is like inside a Necron Tomb World is already to misunderstand the question. Life is not something that happens there by accident. It is permitted, allowed, sometimes cultivated, sometimes harvested, sometimes corrected. The Necrons do not see living beings as inhabitants in the way humans understand the word. You are not citizens, nor guests, nor even prisoners. You are variables, inputs in equations written before your son was born. And yet, there are those who live there. Some arrive willingly, chasing rumors of lost technology powerful enough to turn the tides of war. Others are sent as expendable labor, their lives deemed cheaper than the secrets they might uncover. A few are born there, raised beneath skies that never truly change, never knowing that the ground beneath their feet is not stone but a vast, patient machine. These people eat, sleep, work, and dream. They tell stories. They fear the dark in ways they cannot explain. They feel watched even when no eyes are visible. They live entire lives without realizing that their world is listening to every breath they take. The tomb world does not hate them. Hatred would require emotion, and emotion is inefficient. What the tomb world possesses instead is purpose. It was built to endure the death of the universe if necessary, to outlast entropy itself. Compared to that timescale, a human life is a flicker, barely long enough to be measured, yet still useful. Even the briefest existence can be studied. Even the smallest fear can be recorded. From the very first moment you set foot on such a world, the terms of your existence change. You are no longer simply alive. You are inside something that was never meant to host life at all. And the longer you remain, the more that world begins to decide what life will mean for you. Because on a Necron Tomb World, being alive does not mean you are safe. It means you have been noticed. Imagine standing on a planet that feels finished. The air is still, not calm but complete, as if nothing more is meant to happen here. The sky does not threaten storms, the ground shows no sign of erosion, and time itself seems hesitant to move forward. This is often how survivors describe their first moments on a Necron Tomb World, an overwhelming sense that everything has already occurred, and that they are arriving far too late to matter. Yet that feeling is not accidental. It is engineered. Because the greatest deception of a tomb world is the illusion that nothing is happening. In truth, everything is happening. Beneath the surface, far beyond the reach of drills or scanners, lies a planetary intelligence that never truly powers down. Necron Tomb Worlds were designed during an age when gods walked among mortals and reality itself could be rewritten like faulty code. These worlds are not cities built upon planets, they are the planet. Every mountain may conceal dormant pylons. Every plain may be layered above forgotten vaults. Even the crust itself can be reconfigured at will, reshaped by machines that do not need permission, rest, or mercy. What makes this terrifying is not the technology, but the patience behind it. A tomb world can wait millions of years without error. It can allow dust to bury its entrances, oceans to flood its chambers, civilizations to rise and die on its surface, all without deviating from its original purpose. To such a system, organic life is not an intrusion. It is an opportunity. Something temporary has wandered into something eternal. And here is the part most explorers never consider. If a tomb world truly did not want you there, you would never know it existed. The fact that you can walk its surface, build shelters, extract resources, even form communities, means the world has already made a calculation. It has decided that your presence does not interfere, yet. That alone should terrify you more than any waking Necron warrior ever could. Because, life, on a tomb world often begins peacefully. People work. They establish routines. They convince themselves that the unease they feel is nothing more than superstition or exhaustion. Generations may pass without a single overt sign of Necron activity. No marching legions. No emerald beams tearing through the night. Just subtle patterns no one can quite explain. Machines that never fail. Structures that never degrade. Tunnels that seem to extend farther each time they are mapped. The planet provides, but it never explains itself. And slowly, without anyone noticing the exact moment it begins, the world starts to learn its inhabitants. Stay with this story until the end, and you'll discover why some Necron tomb worlds allow entire populations to thrive for centuries, and why their awakening is never random, never rushed, and never merciful. Because the most horrifying truth is not what happens when the Necrons rise. It's what they were doing while they slept. Those who survive long enough on a Necron tomb world often struggle to explain this sensation. It is not fear in the traditional sense, not the sudden spike of panic that comes from visible danger. It is something quieter, heavier, a constant pressure at the back of the mind, as if the planet itself is aware of every step you take. The ground never shifts unexpectedly, yet it never truly settles either. The wind moves when it should, but never more than necessary. Nothing feels random. And in a galaxy defined by chaos, randomness is the closest thing to comfort humanity has. A tomb world does not resemble the ruins of a dead civilization. There are no collapsed towers, no eroded monuments, no signs of neglect. Even when structures appear broken, the damage feels intentional, preserved exactly as it was left millions of years ago. Cracks do not spread. Metal does not rust. Stone does not crumble. Everything exists in a state of perfect suspension, like a breath held indefinitely. This is not decay, it is restraint. The surface itself is part of the deception. Some tomb worlds present themselves as barren rocks, lifeless and unremarkable. Others are lush, even habitable, their ecosystems carefully curated or subtly altered over millennia. Forests may grow in patterns too symmetrical to notice at first glance. Rivers may flow along routes that never change, year after year. Wildlife may flourish without predators, without disease, without evolution. These worlds feel safe. And safety, on a tomb world, is a lure. What few realize is that the planet is constantly adjusting itself around its inhabitants. Not dramatically, not yet. Tiny alterations occur beneath the threshold of awareness. Energy flows reroute. Subsurface structures awaken just enough to monitor, to sample, to record. The tomb world is not watching in the way a sentient being watches. It is calculating, measuring biomass, tracking population growth, observing behavioral patterns. Life is data, and data is valuable. Imperial surveyors who have dared to study these planets often report anomalies they cannot explain. Auspex readings that contradict one another. Geological scans that suggest impossible internal geometries. Power signatures that flicker briefly and then vanish, as if the world itself is deciding how much it is willing to reveal. Many of these reports are dismissed, buried under layers of bureaucratic denial. After all, acknowledging the truth would mean admitting that some planets are not merely hostile, but aware. For those who live on the surface, the awareness manifests in subtler ways. Machinery lasts far longer than it should. Infrastructure failures are rare. Crops grow reliably, even in poor soil. Accidents happen less often, but when they do, they are strangely precise. A single individual disappears. A structure collapses without damaging those nearby. It is as if the world is pruning rather than destroying, removing elements that no longer serve a function. And beneath all of this lies the true horror, the realization that the Necrons do not need to hurry. They are not rushing toward conquest or survival. They have already won the longest war imaginable, the war against time itself. Every second you live on a tomb world is a second measured against eternity. Every choice you make is recorded by systems that will still exist when your species is nothing more than a footnote in a forgotten archive. The planet does not rush to awaken its armies. It does not panic. It does not react emotionally to intrusion. It simply allows life to exist long enough to become predictable. And once something is predictable, it can be controlled. Life does not arrive on a Necron Tomb World by chance alone. For every explorer who stumbles upon one, countless others are guided away without ever realizing it. Navigation systems malfunction. Warp routes subtly destabilize. Astropathic warnings go unheard. The galaxy itself seems to conspire to keep most beings at a distance. But when life does arrive, when ships land, settlements form, and people begin to call the world home, it is because the tomb world has permitted it. And permission, in this context, is never meaningless. Some come seeking knowledge. Rogue traders chasing forbidden technology speak in hushed tones of living metal and machines that defy entropy. Adeptus Mechanicus expeditions arrive cloaked in scripture and caution, believing themselves prepared to face any heresy. Others arrive in chains. Penal colonies, slave labor forces, or forgotten regiments are abandoned on distant worlds deemed expendable by an uncaring imperium. To the Necrons, the reason does not matter. Only the result does. Organic life has been introduced into a controlled environment. Then there are those who were born there. Entire populations have lived and died on tomb worlds, without ever knowing what lies beneath them. Children grow up under skies that never truly change, learning routines shaped by a planet that subtly enforces stability. Generations pass without war, without famine, without the chaos so common elsewhere in the galaxy. These societies often view their world as strangely blessed, protected by forces they do not understand. Faith fills the gaps where knowledge should be. After all, how could a planet that provides so reliably be anything but benevolent? But the tomb world does not see settlers, soldiers, or prisoners. It sees categories, behavioral archetypes, genetic variations, emotional responses under controlled conditions. Every life contributes to an ever-expanding archive of biological data. Every birth is recorded. Every death is analyzed. Even grief has a measurable value. Especially grief. There is no rebellion against this system because there is no visible oppressor. No ruler to overthrow. No machine demanding worship. The Necrons remain absent, their presence felt only through the impossible consistency of the world itself. People adapt to the silence. They stop asking questions that have no answers. They accept that some places feel wrong, that some tunnels should not be explored, that some nights are heavier than others. Survival, after all, has a way of silencing curiosity. And yet, not everyone fits neatly into the tomb world's calculations. Some individuals resist the subtle pressures exerted upon them. They dream differently. They notice patterns others ignore. They feel watched not as a vague unease, but as a certainty. These people rarely live long. Accidents claim them. Illnesses strike without warning. or they simply vanish, leaving behind no trace beyond an empty space where a person used to be. The population adjusts. It always does. To the Necrons, this is not cruelty. It is efficiency. A tomb world is not a prison, nor a sanctuary. It is a laboratory spanning continents, operating on timescales that render moral judgment irrelevant. Those who live upon it are not being punished for existing there. They are being studied for as long as they remain useful. And the moment they are no longer useful, the world quietly prepares for the next phase. For most inhabitants of a Necron Tomb World, life does not feel like survival. It feels stable, predictable, almost gentle. Days pass without disaster, without the constant threat of war or famine that defines so much of the Imperium. The sun rises and sets with mechanical consistency. Temperatures remain within comfortable margins. Crops grow in soil that should not sustain them. Machines function far beyond their expected lifespans. To those who live there, the world feels strangely cooperative, as if reality itself is slightly more forgiving. This is how the tomb world keeps you calm. There are no seasons in the true sense. Weather patterns repeat with minor, almost imperceptible variations, just enough to maintain the illusion of natural change. Storms never grow too violent. Droughts never last too long. Earthquakes, when they occur, are shallow and precise, releasing tension without causing widespread destruction. The planet is regulating itself, maintaining optimal conditions for organic life to continue without distraction. A stressed population behaves unpredictably. A comfortable one does not. Food and water are rarely scarce. Even in settlements with limited technology, resources seem to endure. Aquifers replenish themselves. Wildlife populations remain balanced without visible predators. Plants grow in orderly cycles, never overreaching, never failing. To many, it feels like living inside a carefully maintained system, because that is exactly what it is. The tomb world provides not out of generosity, but because survival is required for observation. Yet beneath this stability lies something profoundly unsettling. Nothing ages the way it should. Buildings last too long. Tools remain functional long after they should break. Even the land itself seems resistant to erosion. People notice it, but they rationalize it. Good materials, favorable conditions, divine protection. Anything is easier than accepting the alternative, that the world is actively preventing decay. Over time, behavior begins to shift. Without external threats, communities turn inward. Small disputes take on exaggerated importance. Superstitions form around places that feel wrong, corridors where sound carries oddly, or hills where compasses spin for no reason. Certain areas become avoided without any shared explanation. No one remembers who first decided they were dangerous. They simply accept that they are. Sleep is rarely restful. Dreams repeat. Faces appear that no one recognizes. Some wake with the lingering sensation that their thoughts were interrupted, examined, and then returned slightly altered. People stop talking about these experiences. Not because they are rare, but because they are common. When everyone shares the same quiet fear, silence becomes the safest response. And always, there is the sense of being counted. Not in an obvious way. No census takers arrive. No records are demanded. But when someone dies, the world feels subtly different, as if a note has been removed from a cord. When someone is born, there is a fleeting sense of correction, a barely noticeable adjustment in the environment. The population never grows too quickly. It never shrinks too dramatically. The tomb world is maintaining equilibrium. This is daily life inside a Necron Tomb World. Not suffering, not horror, but management. Existence reduced to a series of acceptable parameters. You wake, you work, you rest, all within boundaries you did not choose and cannot perceive. And as long as you remain within those boundaries, the world allows you to live. But the most dangerous thing about such a life is not the control. It is how easy it becomes to mistake that control for safety. On a Necron Tomb World, architecture is not passive. Structures do not simply stand, they endure with intent. Buildings rise from the ground in shapes that feel deliberate yet impossible to fully comprehend. Angles seem correct until you stare at them too long. Distances feel inconsistent, as though space itself stretches or contracts depending on who is moving through it. The longer someone lives among these structures, the more they sense that the environment is not merely surrounding them, it is responding. Corridors are the first to betray the truth. Paths that should be familiar begin to feel subtly altered. Turns appear sharper. Lengths feel extended by just enough to create doubt. People reach destinations a few seconds later than expected, then a minute, then longer. Maps fail to align with reality, not dramatically, but persistently. There is no single moment where one can point and say, "This is impossible." Instead, there is only the growing realization that the world no longer matches memory. Doors behave strangely. Some open without resistance, as if anticipating your approach. Others refuse to respond, forcing individuals to take longer routes they do not remember choosing. No mechanism appears broken, no force is applied, the structure simply decides. Over time, people learn not to fight it. Resistance wastes energy. Acceptance allows movement. The tomb world does not need to lock you in. It merely guides you where it prefers you to go. Even sound behaves differently. Footsteps echo inconsistently. Voices carry too far in some chambers and vanish entirely in others. Conversations feel exposed, as though walls are listening, because they are. Every vibration is recorded, every frequency analyzed. The architecture itself is part of the tomb world's sensory network, translating movement and noise into data streams older than language. Privacy becomes an abstract concept, remembered but never experienced. Those who spend their lives within Necron-built spaces often develop an instinctive awareness of being tracked, though they rarely articulate it. They pause before entering certain rooms. They avoid standing still for too long in open areas. Some claim the walls grow warmer when anger rises, cooler when fear takes hold. No one can prove these sensations are real. No one can disprove them either. There are places that only seem to exist when someone is present. Chambers discovered by one person cannot always be found again by another. Staircases appear where none were before, then vanish once they have served their purpose. These anomalies are often dismissed as stress or fatigue. The populations above rarely sense what lies below, yet the presence is felt in subtle ways. A faint vibration beneath the ground during the deepest hours of rest. A low, almost inaudible hum that seems to pulse through the bones rather than the ears. Animals grow restless near certain regions. Machinery malfunctions without cause. These are not malfunctions at all. They are maintenance cycles. Diagnostics running on armies that have not yet been called to war. Necron legions are not stored randomly. Each tomb world is organized with obsessive precision. Warriors closest to activation chambers. Immortals positioned near strategic access points. Destroyer cults sealed deeper, where their instability poses no risk to the system. Overlords and cryptex lie entombed in sanctums layered with fail-safes, their awakening governed by conditions set millions of years ago. Every variable is accounted for. Every outcome anticipated. The truly horrifying realization is that the tomb world does not require all of them to awaken at once. Partial activation is enough. A single cohort can rise while the rest remain dormant. The world can test reactions. Measure resistance. Observe how organic populations respond to the presence of something fundamentally unnatural. Panic, submission, worship, each response is valuable data. Some tomb worlds allow their surface populations to live directly above these dormant hosts for centuries. Homes are built unknowingly atop vault ceilings. Children play on ground that separates them from legions capable of erasing their entire species in moments. The Necrons do not see this as cruelty. To them, proximity is efficient. Why transport organic specimens when they can be grown in place? On rare occasions, someone descends too far. A mining operation breaks through a layer that should not exist. An explorer follows a corridor that refuses to end. They find themselves standing before figures of living metal, frozen yet unmistakably aware. Some swear the eyes follow them. Others claim to hear whispers, fragments of ancient commands echoing through their minds. None of these individuals return unchanged, assuming they return at all. The Necrons do not fear being discovered. Discovery changes nothing. The question is not whether the legions will rise, but when it becomes efficient to do so. Until that moment, the Tomb World maintains silence, allowing life to continue above its sleeping armies like insects crawling across a weapon too vast to comprehend. This is the reality of living on a Necron Tomb World. You are never alone, even when the world feels empty. You are standing on the surface of a decision that has not yet been finalized. Beneath every Tomb World surface, the cryptex, the architects and caretakers of Necron society, run experiments that stretch across millennia. These are not crude tests. They do not study life in the messy, unpredictable ways of mortals. Every procedure, every observation, every subtle manipulation is calculated with precision that humans cannot comprehend. Entire populations are variables in equations older than the Imperium itself, measured not only for survival, but for efficiency, obedience, and adaptability. The cryptex are patient. They do not act quickly because speed is unnecessary. 100 generations may live and die, providing perfect data sets for the slow accumulation of knowledge. Birth rates, death rates, emotional patterns, conflict tendencies, all are meticulously recorded. The world itself contributes to this observation. Walls, corridors, machines, even the smallest variations in environment, everything is a sensor, transmitting information to systems that understand life far more intimately than life understands itself. Some experiments are subtle. A water source might dry just slightly faster than expected. Crops fail selectively, affecting only certain families. Pathways are rerouted to create tension or discomfort. These events appear minor to the inhabitants, almost accidental. Yet each occurrence shapes behavior, revealing how individuals and groups respond to stress, scarcity, or surprise. In this way, the cryptex learn to predict responses with uncanny accuracy. Other experiments are far more invasive. Memory can be manipulated, erased, or altered without a trace. A person may forget entire lineages, traditions, or personal experiences, their identity gradually simplified to a version that is easier to catalog and control. Dreams can be monitored, their content analyzed for patterns of fear, hope, and defiance. Individuals may vanish entirely, leaving gaps that teach as much about the survivors as the disappeared. Every action, every reaction, is an experiment in control. Yet the inhabitants rarely suspect this. Life seems ordinary enough, if extraordinarily consistent. The world provides, nurtures, and even punishes, but always within tolerances that feel natural. People believe in luck, divine intervention, or coincidence. They have no concept of being studied on scales that dwarf mortal comprehension. The terrifying truth is that the cryptex do not need to intervene overtly to maintain control. Their designs are self-correcting. The planet anticipates problems before they occur. Individuals who deviate too far from the expected pattern either self-correct or are quietly removed. The world itself enforces the cryptex experiments with mechanical precision, ensuring that life continues only as long as it remains useful. And all the while, the Necron legions slumber below, waiting for the moment when efficiency demands their awakening. On a Tomb World, life is not a gift. It is a calculation. Every joy, every sorrow, every heartbeat contributes to knowledge older than the stars themselves. On a Necron Tomb World, this is not a metaphor. Slowly, imperceptibly, the planet and its caretakers erode memory and identity. Children forget the names of their ancestors. Adults forget the lessons of the past. Traditions simplify. Words lose nuance. Concepts that once shaped societies gradually fade into abstraction. What survives is only what the Tomb World deems necessary, patterns, behaviors, and responses that can be measured, predicted, and cataloged. Dreams, once private sanctuaries of thought, are no longer fully your own. The cryptex can observe them, filter them, even nudge their content in subtle ways. A fleeting nightmare here, a forgotten detail there, and over decades, people forget who they were, what they desired, and what they feared. Some do not even realize the erosion is happening, it is simply the world teaching them to conform. Resistance exists, but it is quiet, easily absorbed by the vast patience of the planet. Language itself becomes a tool of control. Words simplify, meanings narrow, expressions of individuality disappear. Stories told from one generation to the next lose their depth. Legends are compressed into parables. By the time a child reaches adulthood, they may only remember fragments of what came before, just enough to function. History becomes myth, myth becomes habit, habit becomes data, and as identities fade, obedience becomes effortless. People follow routines without questioning them. They instinctively avoid areas that feel wrong, defer to invisible authorities, and accept the world's order as natural. Even acts of defiance are anticipated and incorporated, recorded as another variable to be measured. Free will, if it ever truly existed, is reduced to the illusion of choice. For those who notice too late, the realization is devastating. Friends and family no longer behave as expected, yet they are unchanged, only simplified. Decisions that once mattered seem meaningless. Memories that once defined selfhood have been quietly erased. And still, the world continues, patient, indifferent, and eternal. This slow unraveling is the true horror of life on a tomb world. It is not fire or war that kills, but time itself, meticulously manipulated. Every thought, every dream, every memory contributes to an experiment whose scope is impossible to grasp. And all the while, beneath the surface, the sleeping armies wait, prepared to act when the world deems it necessary. On a Necron Tomb World, to live is to be measured, categorized, and rewritten, long before death ever arrives. On a Necron Tomb World, such moments are rarely random. Systems that have lain dormant for millennia begin to stir with deliberate intent. Machinery hums louder. Energy pulses ripple through crystal lattices buried beneath the surface. Lights flicker in corridors long assumed empty. The subtle shifts that once went unnoticed grow sharper, more insistent. The planet, which has tolerated life for centuries or even millennia, is signaling that the moment of testing is approaching. For those living on the surface, the feeling is uncanny. Animals act nervously. Water flows too quickly in some channels, too slowly in others. People report fleeting sounds that cannot be traced, footsteps in empty halls, whispers carried on the wind, vibrations that resonate through bone and metal alike. The changes are gradual at first, almost easy to ignore. But they accumulate, layering unease upon unease until the very ground beneath one's feet feels alien. The tomb world is patient. It does not rush, but it remembers everything. Every movement, every reaction, every pattern of daily life is recorded and compared against a perfect standard. Deviations are noted, anomalies are corrected, either through subtle environmental shifts or by removing variables entirely. And now, with its systems beginning to awaken, the world itself is testing the population's resilience. How will they respond when the familiar becomes unpredictable? How quickly will fear take hold? How deeply will survival instincts dictate behavior? Those who have lived under the surface for centuries know this moment will arrive. They feel it in the vibrations, the hum of the planet, the unnatural precision of daily life beginning to fray at the edges. They cannot see the awakening armies below, nor the algorithms running in the cryptex sanctums, but they sense the change. Something has begun that cannot be undone. Something is shifting the rules, tightening control, and preparing the world for the inevitable. And for the unsuspecting, there is no warning. The tomb world continues to provide, to nurture, to regulate, even as it slowly prepares to reveal the true scale of its power. Every heartbeat, every movement, every choice has been recorded and catalogued. Now, the results are about to be tested. On a Necron Tomb World, the calmest days are never truly calm. The quiet is the precursor to a storm measured in centuries, and the inhabitants are its unwitting subjects. The world is beginning to wake, and with it, so too do the long-dormant forces beneath. On a Necron Tomb World, awakening is not an explosion. It is a calculated, inevitable crescendo. Systems that have slumbered for millions of years begin to hum with increased intensity. Power conduits buried beneath the crust pulse with green light, carrying energy through veins of metal and crystal. Subterranean machinery stirs, and doors that were once static shift slightly, as if testing the reactions of those above. The world has decided it is time for its long-planned measures to unfold. For the inhabitants, the change is subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Corridors seem longer, ceilings lower. Footsteps echo differently. Air pressure shifts minutely. But soon, patterns they relied on begin to fail. Machines that never broke begin to falter just enough to be noticed. Bridges sway slightly where they were always solid. Even the sun, or the simulated light that bathes their settlements, changes imperceptibly, signaling the end of the illusion of stability. Anxiety rises not because anything overtly violent has occurred, but because the world has begun to assert its intent. Below the surface, dormant Necron legions stir in perfect synchronization. Warriors shift, their joints unlocking, eyes glowing faintly in anticipation of command. Immortals reposition themselves with mechanical precision. Destroyers recalibrate, their weapons awakening from timeless slumber. The planet monitors every reaction of the surface population, measuring fear, confusion, and adaptability. Every heartbeat above is data, every movement and experiment now entering its most critical phase. For those on the surface who notice, the sensation is disorienting. They feel watched more acutely. Sounds seem amplified. Shadows stretch unnaturally. Hallways they had known all their lives suddenly feel alien. Even sleep becomes uneasy. Dreams are punctuated by mechanical rhythms, by the faint echo of footsteps that do not belong to any living creature. The tomb world is preparing, but it has not yet revealed its full scale. And the most horrifying part is that the inhabitants still believe they can influence events. They might think they can flee, hide, or fight. They might cling to routines, to small acts of normalcy. But the world has already accounted for every possibility. Resistance is meaningless. Survival is provisional. Every calculation has been made over millions of years, and the moment to act has arrived. On a Necron Tomb World, awakening is not sudden, but it is inevitable. And when the world finally unleashes its dormant forces, there will be no room for error, no chance for mercy, and no escape for those who underestimated the precision of a system older than the stars. On a Necron Tomb World, inevitability takes form in the awakening of the legions below. It is not chaos. It is not panic. It is perfection in motion. Warriors rise from their stasis pods with mechanical precision, their movements synchronized across kilometers of subterranean vaults. Immortals stretch and rotate, their weapons calibrating as if the mere act of standing demands absolute readiness. Destroyers hum with lethal potential, their energy coils resonating like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Every unit knows its position, its target, its purpose, and the world above continues, oblivious to the scale of the forces that have just begun to stir. Those living on the surface feel only the faintest tremors at first. A vibration in the ground, so slight it could be mistaken for an earthquake. A low, resonant hum, just beneath perception. Animals grow restless. Tools and machinery shift imperceptibly. And then comes the awareness, the creeping, inescapable certainty that something immense and deliberate has changed. Instinct tells the inhabitants to run, hide, or resist, but the tomb world has anticipated every move. Every instinct, every hesitation, every desperate attempt at flight has already been calculated and accounted for. The true horror lies not in the violence to come, but in understanding how patient the Necrons are. They have waited for eons, and in that time they have perfected the timing of every awakening. Surface populations have been allowed to live, to thrive, to become predictable. And now, when the timing is optimal, the world will test them, not out of malice but out of purpose. Their fear, their strategies, their defenses, all will become variables in an experiment written millions of years ago. Some surface dwellers attempt to flee, thinking the ancient legions beneath are still inert. They do not understand that the tomb world itself guides them, herding them like prey into corridors and chambers designed to maximize observation. Paths that once seemed familiar now twist unexpectedly. Doors open or close without explanation. The air carries a faint electrical charge, signaling the awakening armies. Panic spreads, but it is only another data point for the cryptex and the planetary intelligence to record. The tomb world does not need to act violently immediately. Even the threat is sufficient. Awareness alone destabilizes its inhabitants, revealing the strengths and weaknesses of those it watches. Every heartbeat, every erratic breath, every sudden movement is measured, stored, and analyzed. And all of this has been prepared over millions of years, as though the entire world itself were nothing more than an instrument of observation and calculation. On a Necron Tomb World, the awakening is neither sudden nor accidental. It is precise. It is inevitable. And when the full scope of the legions finally reveals itself, every surface life that has thrived so far will confront the harshest lesson of all, that life here has never been theirs to control. On a Necron Tomb World, the concept of life is fluid, shaped entirely by the needs of the planet and its silent masters. The inhabitants above are not merely observed, they are measured, categorized, and repurposed according to criteria they cannot perceive. Birth, growth, and death are not natural occurrences, they are functions within a system designed for efficiency. Even survival becomes subordinate to utility. The planet decides who remains useful and who is expendable, often without overt violence, sometimes without even notice. For those who are kept, life takes on a new meaning. Every movement, every emotion, every decision contributes to the data streams the tomb world generates. Happiness is recorded, fear is amplified, creativity, ingenuity, even rebellion are observed not as freedom, but as variables to optimize. Some individuals are allowed to thrive for decades or centuries, their skills, genetics, or behavior cataloged for future application. Others are removed quietly, their disappearance integrated into the ongoing experiment with surgical precision. Even death is not always final. Biological material may be harvested, consciousness mapped, or memory patterns extracted. The Necrons see this not as cruelty, but as refinement. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is accidental. Every life serves a purpose, whether it realizes it or not. Survival is not a reward, it is a calculation. The longer a person remains alive, the more they contribute to the knowledge that drives the awakening of the world below. Some inhabitants begin to sense this truth subconsciously. They notice how routines are subtly guided, how pathways shift imperceptibly, how misfortune and fortune seem balanced in ways that defy randomness. They may glimpse the underlying order and feel unease, but the world does not allow panic to persist. Adjustment is part of the system. Stress is measured and corrected, fear is quantified, and compliance becomes instinct. And for those who resist, the consequences are just as efficient. The tomb world does not need anger, cruelty, or force. Its corrections are precise, immediate, and often invisible. Individuals who deviate from the parameters disappear, fall ill, or simply find themselves unable to continue functioning within the system. The world does not punish, it optimizes. Life on a Necron Tomb World, then, is not living in the way mortals understand. It is survival within parameters defined by a consciousness older than time, under the gaze of forces whose patience outlasts empires. Utility replaces freedom. Observation replaces privacy. Control replaces choice. And in the end, those who consider themselves alive may realize that their existence has always belonged not to them, but to the planet and the ancient intelligences it harbors. On such a world, being alive does not guarantee safety. It guarantees purpose. And purpose, however measured or cruel, is all the life the tomb world allows. On a Necron Tomb World, that is the final lesson. All the subtle manipulations, the careful nurturing, the patient observation, and the centuries of measured life lead to this moment. The awakening is complete. Dormant legions rise in perfect synchronization, their metal forms gleaming with timeless purpose.